with hypnotherapy, what we really do is we help the person affected by trauma, not to relive the trauma, certainly not, but really helping them to change the narrative about what happened, about what they think happened or what they know happened, so they can move forward. I compare the subconscious mind to a garden. So I'm not a good gardener, but if somebody gardens out there, you'll know that you need to weed out before you plant new seeds. I really believe that we don't talk enough about death, which is part of life. There is no way to grieve except your own way to grieve. Know that what you have to share, the person who receives it should feel honored and privileged. And if it is not received in this way, then it just means that you haven't found the right people to share your grief or your trauma journey with.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me, Stories of Hope, Gratitude, and Resilience. Today, I am so thrilled to have as a guest Nadija Bajrami. Am I saying that correctly?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure. Nadia is a multi-award-winning trauma-focused hypnotherapist, mind coach, Reiki Master, certified grief educator, certified end-of-life doula, a psychic medium, and intuitive development teacher and mentor. She is an empowerment, trauma, and grief specialist. She helps her clients take control of their lives, grow, and find their own path. She helps people become empowered to supercharge their confidence and self-esteem, to overcome their limiting beliefs, manage anxiety and trauma responses, heal their inner child, and develop their intuitive abilities. She also helps people navigate the rocky terrain of grief and is here to be a guiding light for those near the end of their physical lives. She divides her time between Ireland, France, and Switzerland and works primarily online. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for having me. And hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone.
I love that you live between Ireland, France, and Switzerland. That sounds like a beautiful existence to me.
It is. I'm primarily based in Dublin, in Ireland, but my work my calling, I should say, has taken me to expand to France, where I'm originally from, as well as Switzerland as well. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So just to get us started, so our listeners can understand a little bit about your background, can you just share a little bit about your background and the journey that led you to where you are today to get us?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Kelly. So initially, I have, on the academic background, I have like a very rational background. I'm sales and neuroscience, actually, and finance. Sales background. I used to be a sales director for a couple of years, and which at the time I thought was what I was meant to do. And I got very sick now 11 years ago, and I got 3 brain surgeries. So just to explain why I'm doing what I do now, but I got 3 brain surgeries, and I saw that at the time. I didn't qualify myself as specifically spiritual at the time, and I thought, right, if I survive all these surgeries, if the first 2 didn't really work out, and the third one was the last chance, and I said, if that works out, I promised to myself that I would find my calling or my soul purpose.
Yep.
And so I made a deal with the divine, or whoever is looking after us. And then I pulled through, and I just saw this. I was in France at the time, and I saw that as a sign that, right, I have another chance, another go at life, and I need to find what I'm supposed to do. And when I recovered, hypnotherapy was something I went to try. I had an interest in the subconscious mind and the limiting beliefs and empowerment piece, but I had no clue how hypnosis would work. So I found a lady who really helped me tremendously at the time. And that really opened my eyes about what I could do with my own life. So, but before that, to put up all the pieces together with the grief, is I lost my dad when I was 9. Then I lost 2 people very dear to me when I was very young, and I lost somebody. I was one of my partners at the time to cancer as well, and So before I got sick, I was very angry with unprocessed grief, as I will call it now, like not allowing myself to grieve and not having maybe the space to grieve. So you add on top of that the illness, and when I recovered physically, I said, well, I need to do some work emotionally and mentally.
Yeah.
And then that this is when I started my grief healing or navigating journey, as well as my limiting beliefs and mindset work. And after that, I got an opportunity to go to Dublin about a year and a half after I started my therapy work. And as soon as I arrived in Dublin, I just knew that it was where I was supposed to be. And I trained as a trauma focused hypnotherapist. And then I trained as a grief educator with David Kessler in the US online. I became an end of life doula as well 2 years ago. And the Reiki and the energy work came along. And the mediumship, to be honest, the psychic mediumship was always in me. But again, it's a bit like when you come out of the closet. I didn't want to acknowledge it. So when all these came together, I said, right, okay, well, let's just put it there, out there as well. Because I was just being pushed. Life was pushing me from different angles to really follow my path
Yeah.
and to stop living a life that actually wasn't mine. And now I see that I was living like an imposter in this, and it wasn't my life. Hence, my physical body always, either being sick or my mindset not being in the right place, because it's as if like you're trying to move forward, but at the same time you have all the brakes on. So
Yeah.
it wasn't easy. So that's in a nutshell what actually drew me to this. And the end of life piece was something that came to me through my own guidance or my guides. And I said, well, I'm doing the grief work, helping people in grief. I'm doing the therapy work, the trauma work. And something was missing. And I was told, well, now you also need to help the people who are reaching that, stage of ending their physical life.
Right.
And came to me as full circle. That's why I qualify myself. I'm like, I'm covering everything that I'm.
All the bases.
Yeah.
Yes. That is beautiful how you took such three brain surgeries, such a life-changing event for you,
Yeah.
and that you pivoted and said, okay, so this is where I'm going to take this, and I'm going to find my soul purpose. um, Soul purpose. I love that, and I love that you've dedicated your life to helping others. So let's start with the trauma hypnotherapy, because I'm
Mhm.
very curious to learn um, about the types of clients that you would work with, the types of trauma, and what is the process of going through something like that. If someone has experienced deep trauma, how do you guide them through with hypnotherapy?
Now, hypnosis and hypnotherapy is the use of the subconscious mind, our subconscious resources. So it is not talk therapy. There is a little bit of talk, obviously, therapy at the beginning, but it is a therapy that uses the subconscious mind with most of the time eyes closed work. So somebody who comes to me as regards hypnotherapy session, mainly trauma, will know that we're not there just to talk. So how I approach this, I advise people, depending on the type of trauma, to also get some, talk therapy, maybe in combination, or together or before or after, doesn't matter, but I think it works really well. And with hypnotherapy, what we really do is we help the person affected by trauma not to relive the trauma, certainly not even to know sometimes what caused the trauma, because sometimes we don't,
Hmm.
but really to move using the power of their subconscious mind, helping them to change the narrative about what happened, about what they think happened or what they know happened, so they can move forward. So it's very different. I would say it's complementary to talk therapy, but at the same time very different, because the point of hypnotherapy is really to empower people. It's not to go back to the past. It's not to, if obviously if they want to talk, of course we're here to hold space, and that's one of our main duty to start with. But it's really to help them shift the narrative, to shift the awareness to how can I, basically, I'm not a victim of my unfortunate past circumstances, but an ingenious survivor. So
Yeah.
how can I become now? Why can I shift the mindset to become an ingenious survivor? Sometimes I said people know what caused, how they feel. Sometimes they don't. I've
Hmm.
had clients coming to me said, well, I keep doing this in my life. I keep self-harming myself. I keep having those patterns. I don't know why. And of course, I always advise when there's, again, different degrees of trauma to also have counseling and talk therapy, as I said, when I believe it's needed. But definitely, we don't always need to know where it comes from. So, who I'm serving, to answer the question, is primarily now people who have been through abuse,
Mhm.
either abuse in childhood, that's mainly what I'm working with, or also abuse in the marriages, patterns, attachment style issues, which is when the inner child hasn't been, or like that, the little person that we were at some stage didn't have their needs met, the
Yes.
wounds start to be created. And very often they will have those repetitive patterns in their relationships. So these would be the two types of trauma I would work with.
And so people notice those patterns bubbling up in their life, and they don't necessarily need to put their finger on it, just to see that there's something that they need to let go of subconsciously.
Absolutely. Yeah. Correct. I mean, as I said, with hypnotherapy, that's how, I mean, I always say I love it. It's so powerful because, of course, if somebody comes and tells you, well, this happened to me when I was 6 or 8, fine, we're going to work around that. But if they don't know what we're working on is really shifting how their subconscious is actually working with them. We're reprogramming. I compare the subconscious mind to a garden. So I'm not a good gardener, but if somebody gardens out there, you'll know that you need to weed out before you plant new seeds. So
Yes.
what we do is, whatever the weeds are, we know there are weeds that are actually hindering the client or the person. They can feel that in their daily life, in their, I don't know, the way they behave, the way they think, they feel. So then what we need to do is, through hypnosis, weed out with different techniques that we have. Again, we don't always need to know what it is related to. Weed out before we plant new seeds of change, as I call it, so that the client or the person coming working with me can start to see a new thought pattern and then new feelings and then new behaviors. So this is really the power of the mind is we don't need to know because all we know is something is dysfunctioning and we need to empower that piece that is dysfunctioning and bring safety so that we can get out of that protective mode.
Mm. And I get when you experience trauma, feeling safe is a
Yeah.
paramount. You really want to get to that place where you feel safe again, because it makes you feel so groundless.
Everybody I've been working with so far, like every single person, always brought safety. Always. There was always a lack of safety at some stage. And I can say this now as a trauma like focused hypnotherapist is that the key, even when I do, let's say my, initial sessions, my discovery calls, is really to speak about safety. How
Yeah.
are we going to help them to come back to safety? And for that, obviously, the key for me is for them to feel, first of all, safe with me. But
Right.
safety is always what was missing at some stage when there is trauma and is still missing when we react, because obviously there's that potential threat. So then we don't feel safe. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
and there's no way you can really move on to healing until that safety piece is resolved, right? Because when you don't feel safe, you're kind of in fight or flight, and
Right.
there's no opportunity for you to be, kind of self-reflecting and look at what you want to change because you're just trying to get through the day and survive.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So let's move into kind of your work with grief and how that ties together. So you're a certified grief educator. Tell me about that work. I mean, I have just such great respect for it, having experienced, much like the rest of the world, grief of my own. How important it is to work through those very difficult emotions. So talk about kind of your work as a grief educator as well.
Now, another topic I'm very passionate about. So, through my own stories, and as you said yourself, we've all experienced some sort of losses or grief at some stage in our life, unfortunately. And why I decided to become a grief educator in this case was, as our teacher would say, David Kessler would always say, it's to actually turn our wounds into wisdom, our pain into purpose. Said, I have all that grief that took me so long to acknowledge, that if I can help somebody else on that same journey, maybe to, and I'm not even talking about timelines, but just if I can help them to show them that there is a way that the
Mhm.
grief will change or morph, I'm going to do it. Now, how do we work as grief educators? Is it's not grief, slightly different. It's not like, grief counseling. There's grief counseling, there's grief therapy. Grief education and support is really holding a safe space, holding space for people to have their grief acknowledged, which is the first thing, for them to be able to express their feelings, but also for us to start to question what they're telling us, and to actually help them question what they're telling us themselves. That's the education piece. We talk about grief, we talk about death, we talk about guilt. So it is not just, I would say, therapy, like classic talk therapy, where the therapist is there and the grieving person talks and we take notes or we listen. It's really a discussion, and that's what I love about the work I do. It's a true relationship. I know my
Yeah.
clients always tell me, say, when I work with you, Nadia, I have the feeling we talk, we chat, there's an exchange. They don't feel like they have to come and just talk and talk by themselves. And by having this conversation, by asking them to think about something, or even like choosing a topic, their grief evolves as well. They feel that, oh, something is shifting, something is changing. They think, and it's not always easy. Obviously, if somebody is in acute grief, we're not going to start straight away by, talking necessarily about what is grief, what is death. The key is first to start with, depending on the stages of grief that they are at, to hold space, to be there for the person so that they have an external storage, nearly like myself,
Yep.
to be able to have their grief witnessed. And I think this is key. Before anything else, what we do as grief educators is help people to have their grief witnessed. Because nowadays, we live in a what I call death phobic society, where everything around death, it's interesting because we talk about it, but we don't want to see it. So
Yeah.
everything around grief and death is like, okay, let's say the funeral is gone. Right, now move on. Get on with it. It's as if, we try to put a plaster on people, like on the wound. Are you going to be fine now, and that's really what also motivated me to do the work I do, because I really believe that we don't talk enough about death, which is part of life.
Right.
Death, grieving, dying, and that's really what pushed me to help people as a grief educator, is to help them think as well, to see their own grief evolve when they really get conscious that their grief is changing. It's not just the therapist telling them, "Oh, you're at that stage or you're doing this." No, they think, and it's not always easy when we start, because sometimes they think I'm mad, and most of the time we're doing well. So why are you telling me that my loved one's death can be meaningful? They don't always understand. We also help them to think of not a meaning to the loss that we experience, which is a tragedy, but to how can I turn this into something meaningful?
Right.
Big
Yeah.
picture.
And that whole pain to purpose conversation is something I think, getting through the raw emotion
Mhm.
before that. So you trained with David Kessler,
Yeah,
who I know was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was his mentor.
absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So and of course she is known,
Stages of grief,
the
and yeah,
stages
yeah.
of grief and all of that. So um, with those stages of grief and with your education with David Kessler, can you kind of review for people what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talked about with the stages of grief, and what you now, as a grief educator, training with David Kessler, your interpretation of that and explanation? Because I know that from some of the people that I have worked with,
Mhm.
that they've heard, kind of somewhere in the past, they've heard about these stages of grief when they experience grief themselves. But sometimes people get concretely like focused on them. I haven't experienced that one yet, or I haven't been, and they don't understand that maybe there's one of those stages that they they may not experience at all, or they may just go through very quickly. So, can you expand and explain a little bit about those stages?
Absolutely, yes. So, I mean, the with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, we talk about, the 5 stages of grief. So, we have obviously, I mean, obviously, it's always obvious to me, not obvious to everybody. So, I'm not going to maybe go into details in all of them, but we can start with the denial, anger. We have bargaining, depression, acceptance, and then the sixth meaning, as David Kessler says, is finding meaning. That's our favorite one, the sixth one.
Yes.
But these stages of grief at the time when I studied with him, and even my own readings of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, is that they were needed to help people to see. I wouldn't even say why they were feeling, but what they were feeling, to understand their emotions, to understand that, oh, is this normal? Why am I feeling this? What's happening with me? So, to be very clear, everything I've learned about that, and that I've actually, the conferences I've attended to, the teachings, is that the stages are not linear. They're an indication. They're just there to tell people, oh, look, anger is normal when you're grieving. Denial is normal because after the initial shock of, let's say, somebody has their, the parents die in a car crash, and the police comes and tells you, well, unfortunately, we have bad news. Your parents passed away now in an accident. The first thing that can happen is that denial, like that's impossible. I just spoke to them 10 minutes ago on the phone. They
Right.
can't be, gone. Then you can have the anger stage, which I've been in for years and decades, where, well, I'm so angry at the world, at God, at everybody, whatever, people believe in. And then you might have the bargaining, but what if, what if, or maybe if that could change. Then you have the depression where, like, that's it, what we call the grief depression, where you sometimes can't wake up or can't do things. And then you might have the acceptance, and then later on the finding meaning. But there's no order, and that's what I wanted to tell people. You might be angry at the beginning. I was very angry. I wasn't in denial when I was told people were gone.
Hmm.
But then the changes, like the stages really change them off. Like you can start with anger, you can maybe even start with acceptance. Some people, I've met people, I don't know about you, Kelly, that you see them and you think, they tell you, well, whatever, I lost this person and now I need to think of my life. I'm moving on. So when we feel from the outside, oh, it's like, oh, she's accepting. She seems to be in this acceptance stage. And
Yeah.
then 3 months later, you can see the same person that comes to you, or that you meet her, and she's full of anger. You
Yeah.
know, it's nothing is linear. There's no order, and I think it's really important to be very, I think, clear about this, because I know there's been a few discussions around the stages of grief where people think, "Oh, I'm not there yet. I haven't done that one." So I
Hmm.
mean, I need to wait maybe a couple of months before I am in depression or anger or bargaining, which to me is not healthy. It's important
Yes.
to say this because we put a lot of extra pressure on ourselves if we think that there is a certain way to grieve. And I think what I'm trying to say is there is no way to grieve except your own way to grieve.
Yeah, that is such a helpful explanation. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
I think because I think people, I would agree that when they hear the word stages, they feel like that's something they need to work through. And sometimes when I think about those, though, the anger or the denial or whatever, I'm I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, so I'm going to date myself now. But there was a game called Simon, and you had to light up the different parts, and then you had to push on the buttons to kind of say remember which button was lit up in what order. And sometimes that's what grief feels like, is that you don't know what is going to light up next, what's going to come. And there in my own personal journey, I wrote about it. I called it the rogue wave of grief, so that I was going along and everything seemed to be moving at a certain pace, and I
Mm,
was working through my emotions. And then all of a sudden, one day, something about my loss hit me like a ton of bricks. And I didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming. And I went to grief counseling for about a year after my son passed. And I remember we had a conversation. There was something that I kept having a recurring dream, and it wasn't pleasant, and it wasn't something I wanted to be thinking about. And she was very kind in how she presented it to me. She said, your brain can really be protective of you. And I know that you, as a trauma hypnotherapist,
yes,
would be very familiar with that. And she
absolutely.
said, I think where we are right now is that you're ready to look at this piece of it. And so don't be afraid. It's bubbling up because you're ready to see it. And it gave me such peace to know, okay, so this is not me backpedaling. This is not me going back to square one. This is me saying, okay, now you're ready. Now you're strong enough to look at this.
Mm,
Um, but like you said, it is not a linear process at all. Sometimes, I would describe it as when you're those tangled Christmas lights that you have, and you're trying to get all the knots out and get the lights to light up. Um, so when someone comes to you and they have one of the stages that you mentioned was depression,
mm.
and there is a difference between grief and
Clinical, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's clinical depression, is not grief depression. Absolutely. Let's be clear.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's important for people to understand, because grief and the feelings that you go through,
Mhm.
that is a natural part of that journey. And clinical depression is something a little different, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And this is a very important topic. And it's when I work with grieving people, this is, I think, a topic we always talk about. I think I haven't met anyone yet that we haven't spoken about that depression part where I'm not obviously a doctor, a GP, or a medical practitioner. I'm a therapist and then a grief specialist. But when people come to me grieving, most of the time, most of them tell me, well, I'm taking, antidepressants, I'm taking medication so I can sleep. And lots of them mention antidepressants. So I think, as doctors will know better, but when you're in grief, you have this grief brain starting, as you said, protective, protecting you, but also altering the way you feel, the way you even, you behave, because it's a shock. It's a shock to the system. So
Mhm.
something horrible happened that shocked the system. So your ability to cope, so that's by the way also how we define trauma. Not every death is traumatic, but in every trauma there is grief.
Yes.
So how we actually define trauma is any experience that overwhelms our ability to cope. So grief is an experience that will overwhelm your ability to cope. So then what we call grief depression, will translate in, I would say, similar symptoms to clinical depression. People, they don't want to do anything, they don't want to maybe eat, they don't want to get up, they feel everything is pointless. But that's because they lost the person they love or somebody dear to them. It's not because the chemical in the brain evolved over time or because something was going wrong. It's a shock to the system. And I really want to be very clear, because despite not being a doctor, and I won't go into any medical discussions, but grief depression will settle as we move, navigate throughout grief. I don't even want to mention time. Time is irrelevant.
Yes.
Just move on our grief journey. And antidepressants there, as we know, are not necessarily useful for grief because it's grief depression. It's not clinical depression. So of course, their medication is usually prescribed just to calm the person and, bring them to some sort of safety again so they can operate. But it's not the same. And I really repeat that to everybody, because people then tell me, oh, how long am I going to be depressed? Is this for life? No,
Right.
it's something that we're going to go through, the motions we're going through, a bit like the stages in this case, before the depression. can last a long time for somebody and maybe a bit less longer for someone else. It will really depend on different criteria. Everybody's grief journey is different. And I think everything we talk about today anyway, I hope I'm trying to be clear there, is that grief is unique. It's a unique experience. The way I grieve is going to be different to the way you grieve, to the way, I mean, somebody can lose. I have two siblings. We all have lost our father. The three of us are grieving our father totally differently.
Yes.
Totally differently. The angry one, that's me. That was me, not them. I've never really seen them angry. You see? So what I mean is every person will grieve differently. So even depression there can be very short, can be a bit longer. But I like to talk about the grief brain because grief brain alters the senses. You know, when we are in the grief fog. And
Yes.
then, of course, I mean, let's face it, I'm so sorry to hear you lost your son, but you know, when you lose a precious, a child, someone so precious, I mean, you can't expect, nobody can expect the person to wake up in the morning and wanting to get up and shower and get on and have breakfast. So, yes, then obviously we can go into the depression stage of, well, I don't want to get up. I don't even want to, you know, get my clothes or dressed on. What's the point? Yes. So it's very important for me to distinguish this because people really think that's what I'm experiencing, that they have a problem. They
Yeah.
don't have a problem. Somebody they love is no longer there. So it
Right.
is not a problem. They're reacting to a shock.
Hey guys, Kelly here. I wanted to jump in and let you know that you can find out more about my work by visiting my website at kellybuckley.com, or you can find my books on Amazon. Okay, back to the episode. And I have great respect for physicians and who they see so many people coming through their office who are
Absolutely.
genuinely struggling with depression.
Yes.
And it can be hard to kind of discriminate when you're looking whether
Mm.
this person requires assistance in that way or talk therapy. But it goes back to that very important piece that you said at the beginning about how we are uncomfortable having conversations about death and about
Mm.
grief and what happens and when the casserole dishes are returned and people expect everything to go back to normal and that person is like, my life is the last thing, but it's not going to be normal for a while because I am reeling. um what would you say, because I've always thought, like, yes, we need to have more conversations about this. Grief is something so deeply personal, but it is also just as normal as birth. This is just another piece of the life cycle that we're experiencing. So why are we hiding our emotions away from people? Why are we not able to have open conversations about that? And that's why I think your work is so important. um how can we improve on that? How can we promote more conversation?
Well, here, I think I heard something, I can't remember which actor I was last week. I heard something very interesting randomly on the social media. And what the person was saying is, as a society overall, and it wasn't like a specific country, as a society, we should just learn to be present, like literally, physically, emotionally present with somebody, like present anyway. But when we talk about grief, is to be present. So if I can say, like, how can we improve that? My opinion on this is to learn to be present. What do I mean by that? If we know somebody who's grieving, somebody close to us, or a friend, or whoever, somebody we care about, the first thing we should be doing, if I can say should, I don't like to use the word should, but the first thing advisable to do would be for that grieving person to know that you are there. Not just to tell them, oh, ring me if you need anything. For you to be present, do something, cook something, go and pick up the children from at school. I don't know, help tidy the garden, whatever it is. I don't know. Come, say it, offer. Don't just like talk. Be present. If the person is ready, if they accept, they will tell you. But if they don't, believe me, they will always remember you were there for their grief. I think this is something people forget is the person in grief, we have this grief brain. We all have them when we're grieving. And sometimes you're not ready. Even if your best friend comes with a nice whatever meal for you and you can't eat, you're just gonna dismiss them. Do it anyway. I think the first thing is to be present, and then by being present, you encourage the person to talk about grief. That's when they're grieving. That's that stage of grief where the two needs of the grief, there's six, but the two main one is again to have your grief witness, to be able to express your feelings, because these ones are very rarely met.
Yeah.
Because again, we don't want to talk about it. But when the person is grieving, is to be present physically, emotionally, to be there, not just to tell them ring me, because they won't. They
Yeah.
won't. They're not in a position to ring anybody. They don't want to talk. They don't want to eat. The person that they love is gone. So they,
Mm.
they can't care less about the chicken dinner or whatever they want to eat. But they will know that when they were going through that, that person was there.
That
Now,
person.
yeah. But now as a where we could improve around death and like grief is honestly, and this is gonna sound maybe strange, but it's education. That's why I love what I do. It's educating people. This is
Right.
why I chose this grief education path, is educate them about death, about grief. Even talking about the stages of grief, that's an educational piece. Not everybody knows that
Mm-hmm.
very angry could be normal in grief. They might think, "Oh, there's something wrong with me." No, it's very normal. So the education piece, and also remembering that one day we came on this physical plane, earth plane as we call it, one day we will go.
Yes.
So let's talk about, that actually ties in quite nicely with the end of life doula, because we have the birth doulas, which are very, people know most of the time birth doulas. These ladies or men or people who actually help mothers, with the delivery, with the babies. So birth doula will help people come to this world. Well, again, end of life doula, we will help people leaving that physical world. So grief in there and talking about death should really be part of life, because we come, we
Yeah.
go. But if we can talk about the we go, it will make everybody's life a bit easier. The person who, for example, is dying, the person who are staying after them, and if we just are now focusing on the griever, is even before they became a bereaved person, it's important to be able to talk honestly about grief and death. But the problem is there is loads of misconceptions, unknown, and people feel uncomfortable. This is what I said. We want to put a plaster of like, you're going to be okay now.
Yeah.
So we tend to use what we call these banalities, general sentences. Time heals and they're in a better place. All these awful sentences that we should never use ever. There's
Yes.
one thing I tell everybody today. I'm very passionate about that. Please, if you don't know what to say, honestly, don't say anything. Give the person a hug. Don't say anything, because all these sentences that we hear are very harmful to somebody in grief. Oh, well, your mother was 93. She lived a good life. Doesn't matter. She can be 105. She's still your mother. So it
Exactly.
doesn't matter. So I don't know. Hopefully, I didn't go into a tangent there.
No, I think that that is so helpful. And it is, for one thing that I want to add to that is that if you can't physically be there for that person,
Mhm.
one thing that I found tremendously healing for me was that my son's friends wrote letters. They told me funny stories, and I got to know a piece of my son that I didn't know before he passed. And that was so beautiful. So if you don't know what to say, sometimes sharing a memory that person who is grieving would not have known is something beautiful. So, and another thing, just as a bereaved parent,
Mhm.
um, one of the things, and I've talked to so many bereaved parents about this as well, is that people genuinely they shy away from talking about our
Mhm.
child because they don't know how we're going to react. And I completely understand it. But on the flip side, I will always be Stephen's mom, and I'm proud of him whether he is here physically or not. So go ahead, talk about him and celebrate the person that he was. Um, Now, yes, early in grief that's a bit trickier because you're going through a hard time. But I think it's important to be able to say their name, to continue to say their name, even though they are not there. And that's just not for children lost. That's for any loss.
Everyone. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah,
Sometimes
absolutely.
I fully agree, and thank you for adding this because, as we said before, about the needs of the griever to talk about their feelings as well. But what we should really definitely, what I would emphasize is the people we loved will always be within us. They're there. They haven't disappeared. Obviously physically they're gone, but as uncomfortable as it might seem to a lot of people, because most of people don't want to hurt our feelings. So they say, well, I'm not going to open that can of worms now, because if I start talking about, let's say, Mother's Day in this case, oh, she'll think about her son. And if I start to talk about my son and her son, but what I would encourage people to do, just what you said, Kelly, is bring their name, talk about them, because this bring them back to life, for the bereaved person.
Yeah.
And it's an honor. It's always an honor, when we can talk about somebody, because even if the person who's grieving will be sad and, you might see tears, but please, and I'm talking to the audience, don't be confused. Most of the time they're tears because they're happy that somebody remembers them.
Yeah.
It's not just tears of sadness. It's not just that, oh my God, now we're upset her and she's gonna cry. She's the
Mm.
person. Very often we will shed those tears because, oh God, they're talking about him. They're talking about him again. They haven't forgotten him. And that is amazing, And I think it's an important message as well, that when we see people crying, we feel uncomfortable because we don't want to be the source of that sadness. But most of the time, mixed with the sadness, there's that relief that they haven't forgotten him or her.
Yes, that is so true. Such a great point. I want to switch a little bit now to gratitude because
Mm-hmm.
part of the we talked before we started the recording about the purpose of this podcast and how I truly believe that the things that break us, that we can put ourselves back together and be more beautiful because of it, and find that meaning and purpose, like you mentioned earlier. Um, in my approach to grief, and everybody's approach is different and is valid for their journey. But in my approach to grief, I found looking for gratitude in the little things was a way for me to anchor myself to the present moment. And in the present moment, I was okay. So it was almost like a little bit of a moment of reprieve. And so what, as a family, we did is we would talk about our one little things for the day. It's never anything big. Sometimes one little thing could be, the fresh strawberries that I got out of my garden before the birds got them, or it could be the fact that I felt strong enough to walk to my mailbox that day. For my son, it was that he had a good day at school when, that first year was a struggle because he lost his brother. What do you have to say to people about the relationship between gratitude and how it intersects with how they process grief?
Now, what I can add there is that gratitude is it's not an option. I know it sounds a bit blunt, but to me, it's not an option, because even sometimes without wanting it, we know that we have things to be grateful for. So it's something that we can train ourselves to do. And I mean that because working with people in grief, mainly there are trauma, when we start to talk about gratitude, and it's something I bring a lot in my sessions, initially people think I'm a bit crazy, and they say, well, how can I be grateful, because obviously there's nothing to be grateful about when I've been going through a difficult time, horrendous time, or losing somebody. But actually, gratitude, the way I see it, is that even if we don't want to go into any specific routine, it's an exercise. I explain to people, if you see it as an exercise, a practice, a daily practice, again, you will rewire your brain. You will reprogram your brain, and your brain will understand that there is a new exercise you need to do. There is a new pattern. So even if we don't initially feel that there's anything to be grateful for, or that we really want to do it, as we maybe do it for the sake of doing it to start with, because at the initial stages, it can be very hard to bring the gratitude piece because people
Mm-hmm.
think there's nothing to be grateful. But I tell them to see it as an exercise to do, homework to do, a piece of homework. So to include in the daily life. And then because of that, the way the mind works is repetition, basically. Huh? That's how the subconscious works, by repetition. You
Yes.
start a new practice and then you start to believe in it. You start to see that, oh, something is changing there. And because you see the changes, then you start to really believe in them.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the brain works. Obviously, we don't need to see to believe, but when we're going through grief, especially there, if people do that piece of homework, they start to do the homework on a regular basis, then it becomes like a habit. And then as it becomes a habit in their daily life, they start to enjoy it. And then they also feel that the grief is changing there again because they will pay attention to something nice. Well, I woke up this morning, I had a shower. I always tell people, your gratitude journal, I encourage them to have to write 5 things they're grateful for on a piece of paper, a journal or a book. And I says, well, your gratitude points can be, I had a shower this morning. I
Mm-hmm.
had meals, my 3 meals, or I slept okay, or I don't know, it's a sunny day, anything. I think gratitude, we think about what I've heard anyway, people think that they need to put some amazing things on paper. Well, I have an amazing job, I had a promotion. No, 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 it's any single thing that helps us to put the other step in front of us. So
Right.
take the next baby step. For me, gratitude when we're grieving is to help us to take those baby steps to
Yes.
move forward and on our grief journey. But really, what worked with the people I work with is to see it as a bit of an exercise to do on the side.
Mm-hmm.
We start to enjoy it because the right, the things come, and also as we remember, I know you're a writer. When we put things on paper, we give them life.
We
They
do.
become real. They become alive. So when we start to write every day, even 1, 2, 3 things we're grateful for, the sun, my nails, I don't know, my hair, it starts to expand in a positive way. And this has an effect on our grief without even us forcing anything.
I mean, I think too, for me, I mean, you obviously can't change the pain of a loss that, or a tragedy that you experience, but you can alleviate some of the suffering. And
Yes.
I think for me, what the way that I viewed it, especially as I got a little further out from that initial shock of loss, was that I tethered all those one little things together and I held on to that as I found my way back. And it provided such a perspective so that I could say, oh my gosh, my heart is just, I feel like it's been ground into dust, but I still have a beautiful son. And so I was able to say, okay, this is really bad. It didn't change that, but this is all also here. All of these blessings are also here while I am grieving. And it provided a perspective that allowed me to continue to go on, as you said, to take those baby steps. So I'm so glad that you get your clients to do that, because I
I,
am.
yeah, yeah. It's part of the work we do all with everybody, every single person. Yes. Mm.
That's so important. Um, Just in parting words before we close out, is there a message or a piece of wisdom from the depth of your work that you would like to leave our audience with?
Now, let me phrase this the right way. Something came to my mind is that trauma or grief, I'm going to focus whatever, could be trauma, grief is sharing your grief journey or your trauma journey with someone is a privilege for the person receiving it. So, what I want to say is please know that what you have to share, the person who receives it should feel honored and privileged. And if it is not received in this way, then it just means that you haven't found the right people to share your grief or your trauma journey with. And it's something really important because For me, when I hold space, not just in a professional setting, in a personal setting as well, for me it's a privilege because it means that the person feels safe enough and comfortable enough to open up about those wounds, this pain, the suffering, and to speak with me. So it's a message I sent across the board there for people to know that there are people out there that will feel honored and privileged to listen to your story over and over again.
Mm,
So don't think that you have, there is nobody or that you have a problem because you need to talk about your story over and over again.
that's some beautiful advice. Thank you so much for that. Um, I wish that I feel like I could talk to you for separate episodes about every area of your work, especially the end of life doula. I feel like that is so it's such an important role.
Yes.
It truly is. And read a term. We were going through some loss in our family, and I read a term, good death, having a good death. And
Yes.
and people probably would think that that's a weird thing to say, but that's quite possible when you are losing someone, to
Yes.
create a space where um, that person's surrounded by love and you guide them through that. So you're going to have to come back and talk to me some more about that on another episode, because I
Oh,
just,
absolutely. I'll be delighted. But I had a client just to make to add what you said. I had a client who actually he threw a sending off party to himself, with his family. He
oh,
called it my sending off party. So just talk about a good death, you see. Yes,
yeah,
you can have a good death. And again, the importance of we're just gonna talk about the importance again of talking about death because he managed to talk about his death with his loved ones, hence him having a good death, a good
yeah,
sending off.
absolutely. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
To close out, so I talk about the gratitude. So I will share my one little things with you, and I'll ask you what yours are. Okay. So today I am thankful for the blue skies here in the Carolinas where I live. Um, I'm thankful that I woke up and I feel healthy. I had some health issues a little while ago and I feel great. And I am super thankful for that. And I'm thankful, as I say in a lot of my podcast episodes, that my dogs did not come out and join the conversation. So those are my one little things today. So what are you thankful for?
Well, I'm also thankful for the energy I have when I woke up because I'm still going through some health issues at the moment that I am getting sorted. So I'm very grateful that my energy levels were high enough today to be able to be there as well, and talk to everyone. Very grateful as well to actually very grateful for my family. It took me a long time to say that. So very grateful for my siblings. I mean, I've always loved them, but I think the last couple of days I just woke up every morning feeling really grateful to have the people I have in my life, and really grateful that my cat didn't crash the recording trying to get some some scratches or some treats, some belly rubs. But and yeah, and I think the last thing is genuinely I'm very grateful to be here with you and thank you for having me because very grateful to be able to raise awareness and to spread the message that people don't have to do all this on their own.
Yes. Yes, such an important message. So if you can, please tell our listeners how they can find you and your wonderful work. So if they want to reach out, because you do a lot of work online, correct?
Absolutely, yes, yes. I work with different continents, different countries. Yes, yes, right. In different languages. English is one of them, the main one though. So they can get in touch on my website, www.nbhypnotherapy-mindcoaching.com. Or they can, to be truthful and very honest, they can put my first name and my surname in the Google search. And next to that, they put Dublin or Ireland, they will find everything. There's only one with that first name and surname in Ireland. So if you take my first name, Nadia with a J, Bajrami, my surname, put Ireland and Dublin, you will find all my social medias. And it's my first name and my surname in all my social medias anyway.
Perfect.
Google, like Facebook and Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, so they cannot miss me. And I'll be delighted. By the way, if anybody had any questions or need any clarifications, I mean, we're here for that. So
That is so generous of you. Thank you so much. And we will have all of the links to your website in
thank
the
you.
show notes as well. So I encourage our listeners, if you want to connect, to please do so. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I really
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Take care, you guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.
Thank you for joining me today on Broken Beautiful Me. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and insightful. Remember, every scar tells a story, and every story has the power to heal. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to me, and it helps spread the message of hope and resilience to more people like us. Don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with your friends and family. Together, we can create a community of strength and beauty in our brokenness. Until next time, stay strong, stay beautiful, and keep shining.